The Bosphorus flows southward through the city at a speed of 2.5 knots, November 2001. The man sitting across from me had worked for 3 different intelligence agencies over the course of 22 years. None of them knew about the others, and each one trusted him completely. How is that possible? This file addresses that very question. Do you think a person can be sincerely loyal to more than one truth at the same time? Think about that as you watch. See you in the comments. The Gray. Welcome. Today, I'm telling the story of an operation carried out in the city where 2 continents come closest to one another, Istanbul. A bridge spanning east and west, and a spy standing on that bridge. Both sides saw him as one of their own. Both sides were right. Both sides were wrong. How that was possible, you'll understand by the end of this episode. And when you do, you'll find yourself forced to ask a question you might not want to answer. September 11, 2001. Changed operational terminology in ways the organization could not have fully anticipated. Not the events themselves, the events were data points. The first plane hitting the North Tower was recorded and filed at 8:46 a.m. Eastern Time, and the second plane was recorded again at 9:03 a.m., confirming that this was not an accident, but an act of intent. 2 data points. The probability assessment rose from 0.12 to 0.97 within 17 minutes. The unit recorded this change just as it recorded all threshold crossings, not as an emotion to be experienced, but as information to be processed. What the unit could not fully anticipate was the organization's reaction. The formation registered this shift the way it registers all threshold crossings, as information to be processed, not as emotion to be experienced. What the formation had not fully anticipated was the institutional response. The specific recalibration that the American intelligence community underwent between September and November of 2001, the reorganization of priorities, the expansion of collection mandates, the specific institutional urgency that post-catastrophe environments produce in bureaucracies trying to prove the catastrophe will not repeat. The Istanbul posting was a product of this recalibration. The DIA had identified Istanbul as a priority operational environment in the new post-September landscape for reasons the institutional vocabulary described accurately, and that I will describe here as what those reasons actually were. Istanbul sits at the intersection of multiple intelligence streams that the post-September priorities required. The transit routes for people and materials moving between the Middle East and Europe, the specific institutional networks of a NATO member state whose geographic position placed it at the intersection of the new operational priorities, and the specific quality of a city where the gap between the official institutional surface and the operational reality beneath it was large enough and legible enough to be operationally useful to an observer. With the formation's specific calibration, the posting began in October of 2001, 6 weeks after the towers fell. The Bosphorus Strait runs through the city at 2.5 knots, significantly faster than the Potomac's 0.9 meters per second, faster than the Thames at 1.2, approaching the Rhine at 2 meters per second, but with the specific additional complexity of a bidirectional current that the strait's unique hydrography produces. The surface current runs south from the Black Sea toward the Marmara at 2.5 knots. The deep countercurrent runs north beneath it, a dense saline layer moving in the opposite direction at approximately 1 knot below the surface. 2 currents, same water, opposite directions. I registered this on the first morning of the Istanbul posting, at 0715 hours, standing on the Galata Bridge and looking south toward the Marmara. The temperature was 14 degrees Celsius, the same temperature as Amman's first March morning, but with a quality of cold entirely different from Amman's dry clarity. Istanbul's November cold carries the Black Sea moisture from the north and the Marmara moisture from the south simultaneously. Wet from two directions. The breath vapor dispersed in 1.6 seconds slower than Amman, faster than London, the specific atmospheric condition of a city between two bodies of water. The formation's first requirement in any new environment: map the water, the Bosphorus, two currents, opposite directions, same water, filed. The operational accommodation was on the European side of the city, in the Beyoğlu district, 41 square meters, fourth floor, northeast-facing window with a partial view of the Golden Horn. The 4,100 Kelvin desk lamp. The coffee machine required a 1-degree grind adjustment, 89 degrees produced, suboptimal extraction, 90 degrees correct. The adjustment was made on the second morning, filed, end quote. The Galata Bridge became the daily registration point. Not the Bosphorus itself. The operational geography did not provide direct Bosphorus access in the morning operational window, but the Galata Bridge, which spans the Golden Horn at the point where the waterway opens toward the Bosphorus, providing a specific combination of water visibility, city panorama, and tactical sightline assessment that the formation found operationally useful. The bridge, at 0715 hours in November, had a specific quality that none of the previous postings' registration points had produced. The fish restaurants on the lower deck of the bridge were not yet open. They opened at 0900, but the fishermen were already there, lines in the water, positioned along both railings of the upper deck. At 7:15 a.m. on the first morning, there were approximately 43 fishermen. Each had positioned himself facing the water below at a specific angle. Each appeared to be focused on his own fishing rod and the water beneath it. At the same time, each might have been paying attention to the pedestrian traffic on the bridge. The bridge is a natural observation platform and a natural counter-observation problem. I noticed this situation during my first pass and recorded it under the following headings: Istanbul's operational geography, Galata Bridge, dual-use infrastructure. While the bridge fulfills its official function of connecting Karaköy on the southern bank to Eminönü on the northern bank, it also serves as a surveillance layer 1 that every professional operating on the bridge must assume is active. To the south of the bridge lies the Bosphorus. To the north, the Golden Horn. Fishermen on both railings. Morning log complete. Approved, recorded, filed. The Sultanahmet district is where the empires layered their weight. The Byzantine, Hippodrome, the Hagia Sophia, i.e., the Blue Mosque, the Topkapi Palace, the Grand Bazaar, each structure representing a specific imperial moment, each moment built on or beside or sometimes literally over the moment that preceded it. The Hippodrome's chariot track is beneath the level of the current street by approximately 1.2 meters. The Ottoman city built upward rather than clearing the Byzantine city that preceded it, producing the specific quality of Istanbul's layered geography that is different from any other operational city the career had moved through. In Vienna, the historical layers were visible, but separated the Habsburg architecture, distinct from the medieval core. In Brussels, the guild halls were rebuilt rather than layered. In Istanbul, the layers were simultaneous. The same physical space contained Byzantine, Ottoman, and contemporary institutional functions without clear separation between them. The Hippodrome's column still stood in the middle of a square where contemporary Turkish citizens walked their dogs and children played. In a layered city, the gap between the official surface and the operational reality beneath is not just larger, it is more complex. The official surface is already multiple, already layered, already containing within itself the sediment of previous official surfaces. Reading the gap in Istanbul required reading which layer the gap was in, as well as what the gap contained. I walked through the Sultanahmet district at 0800 on a December morning, the temperature at 6 degrees Celsius, the Black Sea moisture from the north in the air. The Hagia Sophia's dome was visible from the Hippodrome Square. The Blue Mosque's minarets were visible from the Hagia Sophia's forecourt. The layering of the imperial city visible at every sightline. The formation registering it all. The operational assessment running continuously. The man across the table in November of 2001 was named Tariq Shaheen in one institutional context, Mehmet Arslan in a second, and something else entirely in a third context that neither of the first two institutional frameworks knew existed. He was 53 years old. He had been operating at the intersection of the Bosphorus's two currents, metaphorically, not literally, for 22 years. He knew where the surface current ran and where the deep countercurrent ran, and he had spent 2 decades making himself useful to both without either detecting the other. The DIA's interest in Shaheen was specific and operational. He had access to transit networks, the specific human and logistical infrastructure that moved people and materials between the Middle East and Europe through the Istanbul corridor that the post-September operational priorities had elevated to primary collection requirements. The formation's job in Istanbul was, among other operational requirements, to assess Shaheen's value as an access point to those transit networks and to determine whether his multiple institutional relationships represented a usable asset configuration or a threat to any collection effort that used him. This is the assessment question that the posting was structured around. The personal versus positional question of Aman had been, is the capacity in the person or the position? The Istanbul question was different. Is the loyalty in the man or the transaction? A man who serves 3 institutional frameworks simultaneously is one of 3 things. He is loyal to none of them and is extracting value from all 3, in which case he is a transaction, useful as long as the transaction benefits him, and dangerous the moment it does not. Or he is loyal to one of them and using the other 2 as cover for the primary loyalty, in which case he is an asset of the primary framework and a penetration of the other 2. Or he is something that the institutional vocabulary does not have a clean category for. A person who has constructed, across 22 years, a genuine relationship with each framework's specific operational reality, and who operates within each relationship according to its specific terms, without these relationships being in fundamental conflict, not because the frameworks are compatible, but because he has built a specific kind of operational architecture in which they do not collide. The third category is what the Istanbul posting was designed to assess. And the third category is what made the man interesting enough to have a file. He was not in the third file, not yet. The assessment was running. The file was patient. The Kapalı Çarşı, the Grand Bazaar, is a specific operational environment that the formation processes as a high-complexity space. Built across the 15th and 16th centuries, expanded through the Ottoman period, the bazaar covers approximately 30,000 square meters of covered market space, organized around a central hub with 61 streets radiating outward. The ceiling height varies between 3.2 and 8.4 meters, depending on the section. The acoustic properties are correspondingly varied, the lower ceiling sections producing close, directional sound, the higher ceiling sections producing the diffuse, multi-directional sound quality of a large interior space. The ventilation system is Ottoman era and produces a specific quality of air circulation that carries scent and sound through the covered streets in ways that a modern ventilation system would not. The bazaar, at 1,100 hours on a November weekday, has approximately 12,000 visitors moving through its 61 streets. In November, the tourist volume is lower and the local commercial traffic higher. The professional buyers and sellers who use the bazaar as a working commercial environment rather than a tourist attraction. The difference matters operationally because the professional traffic moves with a specific rhythm and direction that the tourist traffic does not, and the deviation from that rhythm and direction is more visible. I entered the bazaar at 1,047 hours on a November Tuesday in 2001. The purpose of the entry was to make contact with a source not Shaheen, a different thread of the Istanbul operational requirements at a specific location inside the bazaar that the source had designated. The contact protocol was standard. Approach the designated location at 1100, confirm the signal, receive the material, exit through the designated route. The deviation appeared at 1053 hours. A male figure, approximately 35 years old, 178 centimeters, medium build, wearing a dark blue jacket, had entered the bazaar approximately 4 minutes after my entry and had maintained a consistent distance of approximately 22 meters across 3 directional changes within the bazaar's covered streets. At any single directional change, the consistency could be explained by the commercial traffic flow across 3 directional changes in the specific pattern I had used, not a standard tourist route, not a standard commercial route. A deliberately irregular movement pattern designed to produce exactly this kind of detection opportunity, for the consistency was no longer explainable by the traffic flow. I had a tail. The bazaar's architecture became a problem to be solved. The ceiling height in the section I was currently moving through was 4.1 meters, the diffuse acoustic zone, where the sound from behind would arrive fractionally delayed and from multiple directions simultaneously, making precise distance assessment by sound alone unreliable. The lighting in this section was the bazaar's standard combination of overhead fluorescent at approximately 3,800 Kelvin and the occasional incandescent display light from individual stalls warmer than 4,100, slightly amber, producing pools of varying light intensity that affected visual assessment at distance. The width of the street was 2.8 meters, narrow enough that the tail could not maintain the 2-meter distance without either closing the gap or falling behind at the next narrowing. The formation processed this at operational speed, not deliberation speed. The variables registered in parallel rather than sequence. The tail's current distance, the street's dimensions, the next 3 junctions, the exit options, the contact obligation at 1100, the time remaining before the contact window opened, 1057 hours. 3 minutes to contact window. The decision was made in approximately 400 milliseconds. Continue to the contact. The tail was maintaining distance, not closing the behavioral signature of surveillance rather than interception. A surveillance tail does not want contact. An interception team closes distance. This tail was watching, not stopping. The contact was made at 1,101 hours, 47 seconds inside the contact window. The material was received. The exchange lasted 11 seconds. The tail maintained distance throughout. I registered the tail's position in my peripheral visual field during the exchange without altering the exchange's visible character. Exit through the bazaar's north gate. The tail followed to the gate and did not exit. He stopped at a carpet stall 12 meters inside the gate and began an apparently commercial conversation with the stall's proprietor. The tail had been burned. He knew I had detected him, or the surveillance had been concluded at the gate, for reasons I could not assess from the information available. The probability assessment assigned 0.68 to the tail being burned and 0.32 to the surveillance being deliberately terminated at the gate. I walked north from the bazaar gate toward the Suleymaniye Mosque, confirmed no follow on the open street, and filed the contact and the tail incident simultaneously at 1,124 hours in the operational log. The tail's appearance was not coincidence. The pattern was showing itself. The network was being watched. Here is what this means, and I want you to hold it, because this is the moment where everything in this episode changes. The hostile actor, identified in the Washington Posting's threat assessment, had not been idle across the 2 years between the DC desk and Istanbul. The Kapalı Çarşı tail was the first direct operational indicator. It would not be the last. And what was coming next on Istiklal Avenue in December would confirm what the Grand Bazaar had only suggested. The network was no longer a theoretical problem. It was a live one. The Galata Bridge dead drop protocol had been established in the second week of the posting. The bridge's dual-deck structure provided a specific operational advantage. The upper deck carried foot traffic and vehicle traffic, and the lower deck housed the fish restaurants. The transition between decks, the stairwells at each end of the bridge and at the midpoint, created specific moments of visual occlusion where the upper deck foot traffic was not visible to the lower deck restaurant, staff, and vice versa. The midpoint stairwell, on the western side, produced approximately 4.2 seconds of visual occlusion from all angles. Simultaneously, 4 seconds and 200 milliseconds, during which a person descending the stairwell was visible to neither the upper deck nor the lower deck. The dead drop was located behind the fourth structural pillar from the eastern end on the lower deck's north face. A water-resistant container adhered to the concrete behind the pillar, accessible from the restaurant walkway during the brief window between the restaurant's cleaning period and its opening at 0900. The window was approximately 11 minutes, from 0843 to 0854. Mated. The cleaning staff cleared the lower deck at 0843. The first restaurant staff arrived to open at 0854. 11 minutes, 41-second round trip to the pillar from the stairwell entrance. The math was sufficient. The drop point received its first material on the 19th of November 2001 at 0847 hours. The material was a handwritten assessment from a source within the Istanbul transit network, not Shaheen, a different node that provided specific information about the movement patterns of individuals using the Istanbul corridor in the weeks before and after September 11. The information was significant, not because it was not complete, but because the specific gaps in the information were themselves informative. The transit network had a specific structure, and the gaps in the source's knowledge of that structure indicated the structure's organizational logic. The formation processed the gaps as data points equal in weight to the information itself. The information from the November 19 drop went into the operational file, and a copy of the assessment, a specific selection of 3 paragraphs from the full document, went into the third file. 207 words, still thin, growing. The dead drop material had also contained something else, oblique, a reference to a communications channel that the Istanbul transit network used for coordinating movement through the Bosphorus corridor. Not named, not described directly. The kind of reference a source makes when they want to indicate awareness of something without documenting the awareness in a form that could be used against them if the material was compromised. But the oblique reference was sufficient for the formation's instruments. The channel was not physical. It was a pattern, a specific timing pattern in the movement of commercial vessels through the Bosphorus Strait, the ferry schedules, the cargo vessel movements, the small boat traffic that the strait's regulatory framework governed. Within the legitimate traffic pattern of the world's busiest maritime passage, a specific sub-pattern was being used to coordinate the transit of individuals through the corridor. The Bosphorus as a communications channel, the water itself as the medium, 2 currents, same water, opposite directions, unquote. And now a third current, invisible, structured, moving through the space between the official currents without touching either filed. Tariq Shaheen, the man with 3 names and 3 institutional relationships, met me for the second time on a Thursday afternoon in December of 2001 at a tea house in the Sultan Ahmet district, 40 meters from the Hippodrome. The tea house was on the 2nd floor of a building whose ground floor was a tourist carpet shop. The 2nd floor was not visible from the street. The staircase was narrow, 0.9 meters wide, limiting any approach to single file. The room had 4 tables, 2 windows facing the Hippodrome, 1 window facing the building's interior courtyard. The ceiling was low, 2.4 meters, producing close, directional acoustics. Every conversation in the room was audible from every other table at the room's dimensions. At 1,420 hours, Shaheen said something in the course of a professional conversation about regional transit infrastructure that the recording device in my inside coat pocket standard operational loadout, the device at 0.7 meters from the conversation's primary speaker, captured at adequate audio quality for later analysis. What he said was analytically precise. Not in the content was professional and appropriate. What was analytically precise was the specific quality of the statement's construction. He had described a gap in the regional transit infrastructure, a specific logistical gap between two nodes in the network, in a way that demonstrated awareness of both nodes' operational reality without demonstrating awareness of either node's full operational character. He was reading the gap, not the network. The gap in the network. The same mechanism, different geography, different institutional context. The same pre-formal pattern recognition that Amman had mapped, that Washington had confirmed, that the third file had been documenting since Budapest, 1993. I updated the third file at 2,200 hours that evening. 207 words became 231. Tariq Shaheen, or whatever his actual name was added as a seventh entry. Tentative, requiring further assessment, but present, the network was wider than Washington had allowed me to see. It was extending into operational environments that the desk's pattern assessment had not reached, and someone else was seeing the same extension from the other side. At 1,834 hours on the 8th of December 2001, walking north on Istiklal Avenue from the tunnel end toward the Galatasaray Junction, a route I had varied across 17 previous evenings, the specific variation being the operating principle I registered a three-person coverage pattern. Istiklal Avenue is 1.4 kilometers long and approximately 25 meters wide, pedestrianized, historically a commercial and cultural boulevard in the European district of the city. At 1,834 hours in December, it carries approximately 4,000 pedestrians per hour. The ambient light is the combination of shop lighting at varying color temperatures, 3,000 to 4,500 Kelvin across the different establishments, and the street's own illumination at approximately 4,000 Kelvin overall. The crowd density at this hour and this season is sufficient to provide natural concealment for a surveillance team, but insufficient to prevent detection by an observer applying systematic detection methodology. Three-person coverage on Istiklal, two on the same side at staggered distances, the primary at approximately 18 meters and the secondary at approximately 34 meters. The third on the opposite side at approximately 22 meters, maintaining a position that would provide visual continuity if the primary turned away. Standard formation for following a professional target through a dense pedestrian environment. But there was a specific deviation from the standard. The primary was not maintaining the standard professional distance management that a surveillance team trained for this specific environment would maintain. At 1,838 hours, when I paused at a bookshop window, a standard detection technique. The pause, producing a natural reason to scan the street behind, without the scan being visible, as a scan the primary, closed the distance by 3 meters rather than holding position. The closure was 300 milliseconds too fast. The reaction time indicated that the primary was responding to a direction rather than making an independent judgment. Someone was directing the primary by communication device. The surveillance team was being run remotely. This was not standard DIA counter-surveillance methodology. This was not standard Turkish intelligence methodology, which I had familiarized through the operational briefing materials before the posting began. This was a third methodology, a third set of operational protocols, a third institutional framework directing a surveillance operation against me on Istiklal Avenue in Istanbul in December of 2001. The temperature was 8 degrees Celsius. The breath vapor dispersed in 1.4 seconds. The crowd around me was moving at the specific rhythm of Istiklal's evening pedestrian traffic. I walked to the end of the block, turned right, entered a passage, one of Istanbul's historic arcade buildings, this one dating from the late 19th century. The narrow interior corridor producing acoustic properties that would register a following entry at 45 meters and visual occlusion for the coverage team's opposite side element for approximately 6 seconds. 6 seconds. Sufficient. I exited through the passage's second entrance onto a parallel street. The primary element had not followed entering the passage, would have required the primary to close distance beyond the professional threshold, and would have confirmed detection for both parties. The surveillance team held position. I was clean, filed at 2,147 hours. The hostile actor had found Istanbul. The third methodology's operational signature was now in the file. The network was no longer a theoretical threat assessment. It was an active operational problem. The operational assessment of Tariq Shaheen required a third meeting that was more direct than the previous two professional function overlaps had allowed. The third meeting was arranged not through the professional network, which would have been observable to the hostile actor, whose surveillance operation on Istiklal had indicated active interest in the Istanbul operational environment, but through a contact channel that used the Bosphorus's physical geography as its medium. A specific ferry route on the Bosphorus, the Beşiktaş, to Kadıköy crossing, which took approximately 40 minutes and crossed the strait at its narrowest navigable point, provided the meeting environment that the operational requirements specified. The vessel carried approximately 340 passengers on a December weekday afternoon crossing. The upper deck was exposed to the Bosphorus wind 14 kilometers per hour from the northeast, the specific Black Sea wind that Istanbul's December produced, and the upper deck seating was largely empty because of the cold. The lower deck's enclosed seating was full. The upper deck, exposed and cold, was operationally cleaner than any indoor environment the Istanbul posting had offered. We met on the upper deck at 1,520 hours on the 17th of December, 2001. The ferry had departed Beşiktaş at 1,512 hours. We had approximately 28 minutes before the Kadıköy dock, 28 minutes at 2.5 knots through the strait, the specific speed of the Bosphorus current visible in the water moving past the vessel's hull. The wind at 14 kilometers per hour produced an ambient sound environment on the upper deck that the acoustic surveillance methodology cannot penetrate at distances greater than approximately 2 meters. The hostile actor's surveillance team, if active on this day, which the probability assessment assigned 0.55, would not be able to place an element within 2 meters on the open ferry deck without being visible as a surveillance element in the sparse upper deck population of approximately 7 passengers. The math was sufficient. The upper Bosphorus deck at 1,520 hours in December was the cleanest meeting environment that the Istanbul operational geometry had produced. Shaheen sat 3 seats away from my position when the ferry reached the midpoint of the crossing. He did not look at me. He looked at the water, the Bosphorus moving at 2.5 knots, the Asian shore approaching, the European shore receding. He spoke without turning. What he said was 11 words. I am not reproducing the 11 words because the 11 words are in the operational file, and the operational file is not this account. What I will say is that the 11 words confirmed the probability assessment that the third category was the correct category. He was not a transaction. He was not a penetration. He was the bridge. And the bridge had just told me that someone was about to demolish it. I walked off the Kadıköy dock at 1,553 hours. The Bosphorus was behind me 2.5 knots southward, the deep countercurrent 1 knot northward beneath, the Asian shore of Istanbul in the December gray. Kadıköy's market district ahead, the formation registering all of it simultaneously. The third file updated that evening. The network entry for Shaheen, the 7th entry. Tentative was promoted from tentative to confirmed. And a new element was added to the file that no previous update had contained: a direction. The hostile actor was not simply surveilling the network. The hostile actor was approaching it from a specific vector. And the vector's direction pointed toward 2003. The significance was not approaching. The significance was scheduled. 271 words. The file was no longer patient in the way that thin files are patient when they are waiting for something uncertain. The file was patient in the specific way that a countdown is patient, not uncertain about the arrival, certain about the timing. On 2003, 1 year away from the close of the Istanbul posting, Tariq Shaheen disappeared from the Istanbul operational environment on the 14th of January 2002. Not dramatically, not with the specific violence that the word disappear sometimes implies in intelligence operational vocabulary. He was present at a professional function on the evening of January 13. His institutional identity, the primary one, the one that the DIA file described, did not appear at the following day's scheduled meeting. His accommodation was found vacated in a manner consistent with a planned departure rather than an emergency exit. His departure was orderly. His files, the specific institutional records associated with his primary identity, were left in a condition that suggested they had been reviewed and selectively organized before he left. He had known the departure was coming. The probability assessment updated. The orderly departure indicated advance notice of a threat. The advance notice indicated either that Shaheen himself had detected the hostile actor's operation and extracted himself, or that the hostile actor had warned him, which would indicate that Shaheen's relationship to the hostile actor was closer than the assessment had categorized. The alternative probability was darker. Shaheen had been extracted by one of his 3 institutional frameworks, the one whose operational priorities required his disappearance from Istanbul rather than his continued presence. In this configuration, the disappearance was not evasion, but reassignment. He had not fled. He had been moved. The distinction between these 2 probabilities was operationally significant. A man who evades is compromised and running. A man who is reassigned is operational and relocating. The same empty accommodation, 2 entirely different meanings. The probability assessment assigned 0.44 to evasion and 0.56 to reassignment, insufficient for a conclusion. The uncertainty was itself a data point. The configuration was more complex than the assessment's instruments could resolve. The file on Shaheen remained open, incomplete. Filed under Unresolved Operational Assessment, Istanbul, 2002. The third file, updated on the 15th of January, 2002. His entry tentative when added in December. Confirmed after the Bosphorus ferry meeting, was now flagged with the specific notation the file uses for entries whose assessment has become more complex rather than more resolved. 271 words. Flagged. The file that knows it is insufficient, patient, and behind the flag, the direction that the Bosphorus ferry meeting had produced, the hostile actor's vector, the 2003 timeline. The significance scheduled. The Istanbul posting had revealed something about the network that the Washington desk had not been able to reveal. The network was not a collection of individuals who happened to share a capacity. It was something that was generating attention from outside. Something that the hostile actor's third methodology was specifically oriented toward. The tale in the Grand Bazaar, the coverage on Istiklal. The surveillance methodology that matched neither DIA nor Turkish intelligence protocols. All of it directed, with increasing specificity, at the operational environment that the network's members were operating within. The hostile actor knew about the network, or was building toward knowing. 2003 was 1 year away. The significance was no longer approaching from a comfortable distance. It was visible, close, moving at a rate that the probability assessment was now tracking with the specific attention the formation reserves for operational problems that have crossed the threshold from theoretical to actual. The Galata Bridge, on the last morning of the Istanbul, posting the 28th of February 2002, had 47 fishermen on the upper deck, 3 more than the first morning's count of 43. The additional 3 had positioned themselves at the midpoint of the bridge's western side, the same location as the stairwell access point for the Galata Bridge dead drop protocol. I registered this at 0715 hours. The temperature was 9 degrees Celsius, slightly warmer than December. The Istanbul winter, beginning its slow transition toward spring. The Bosphorus was visible to the south, moving at 2.5 knots. The Golden Horn was visible to the north. The 3 additional fishermen at the midpoint were registered as a data point. The probability assessment ran in real time. The coincidence of their positioning at the dead drop access point produced a probability weight of 0.38 that their positioning was deliberate rather than coincidental. Below the action threshold, above the notation threshold, filed 3 additional fishermen at midpoint, western side, 0715 hours, the 28th of February, 2002. Deliberate positioning probability 0.38. Below action threshold. Notation retained. The posting concluded at 1,420 hours that afternoon. The operational files were transferred through the standard protocol. The accommodation was vacated. The Bayolu district was left behind. The 41 square meters returned to anonymity. The Galata Bridge remained. The Bosphorus remained. The fishermen remained. The dead drop container removed on the previous morning's final service. The location clean left a concrete pillar behind the 4th structural support on the north face of the lower deck that the next operational officer to use that location would find unmarked and unremarkable. The water moved. The bridge held its position. The surface current went south. The deep countercurrent went north. The city watched from both banks. There is a specific quality to a bridge that spans 2 things. The bridge does not belong to either bank. The bridge belongs to the crossing. Tariq Shaheen had spent 22 years being a bridge. He belonged to the crossing, to the space between the institutional frameworks, not to any one of them. Whether this made him a traitor to each framework or genuinely useful to all 3 is the question that the file cannot answer. The file can document the outputs of his operational existence, the specific information that moved through him, the specific access that his multiple institutional relationships provided, the specific value that each framework extracted from the relationship they believed was exclusive. What the file cannot document is whether a man who serves multiple frameworks simultaneously is betraying each of them or serving something larger than any of them that none of them can name. This is the question this episode presses into you. Not because Shaheen's specific configuration is universal, most people do not work for 3 intelligence services simultaneously, but because the structure of the question is universal. When you operate within multiple frameworks, institutional, personal, moral, that each make claims on your loyalty, and you manage those claims without collapsing any one of them, what are you doing? Are you betraying each framework by serving the others? Or are you the bridge? The Bosphorus does not take sides. It moves in 2 directions at once. The surface current goes south. The deep countercurrent goes north. The bridge above it belongs to neither direction. The city on both banks calls the bridge its own. Maybe the most honest position is not the bank, not the current. The bridge. The thing that connects what cannot connect itself. The thing that belongs to the crossing rather than to either side. Or maybe the bridge is just the place where you can be shot from both directions. The gray area. It was never easy. The Bosphorus ran at 2.5 knots southward on the last morning. The bank held. The water moved in two directions at once. Received, registered, filed. The Gray Operative. Every week, without exception. Start from episode 1. The order is not a suggestion. It never was. The architecture holds. The significance is approaching. Stay in the shadows. The Bosphorus crossing on the ferry from Beşiktaş to Kadıköy on the 17th of December 2001 produced something that the 11 words cannot fully contain, and that this account needs to address before the Istanbul file closes. When Şahin looked at the water and spoke without turning, the specific quality of his attention directed at the strait, at the two currents moving in their opposite directions beneath the same surface, was the same quality that Aman had made visible in 1997, the gap reading capacity. Directed not at another person, not at an institutional statement, but at the water itself, at the gap between the surface current and the deep countercurrent. At the space between two things moving in opposite directions through the same medium, he was reading the Bosphorus the way the formation reads a room, the way Al-Rashid had read the conference room in Amman, the way Walsh had read the institutional policy document in Washington, the gap between what is visible and what is moving beneath the visible. The third file had documented this capacity in 5 people before Istanbul. In Şahin, it was the same capacity applied to water, to geography, to the physical strait that had been moving in two directions at once for geological time before any of the empires whose buildings layered the Sultanahmet district had existed. The formation had built this capacity in me through years of deliberate practice. Al-Rashid had built it through 50 years of regional network pressure. Walsh had built it through sustained institutional analysis. Şahin had built it through 22 years of operating as a bridge between frameworks that would have destroyed each other if they had been able to see each other clearly. Different paths, same capacity. The third file now held 7 entries, 271 words. The pattern was not a collection of individuals who happened to share a reading capacity. The pattern was a set of people who had each, independently, through entirely different mechanisms and entirely different pressures, arrived at the same operational relationship to the gap between what is visible and what moves beneath the visible. The formation's specific name for this is preformal pattern recognition. But that name is the formation's name, the institutional vocabulary the formation uses to describe something that exists independently of the formation's description of it. Şahin did not know the formation's vocabulary. Al-Rashid did not know the formation's vocabulary. Walsh was part of the formation's institutional framework, but had arrived at the capacity through a path that the formation's methodology would not have predicted. They all read the same gap. They all arrived at the same readings before the evidence formally organized itself to support the readings. And someone outside the formation, someone using a third methodology that matched neither DIA nor Turkish intelligence operational signatures, had identified the pattern, was actively surveilling the operational environments in which the pattern's members operated, had, by the 14th of January 2002, moved one of the 7 entries out of the Istanbul operational geography in a departure whose character the probability assessment could not fully resolve. The significance was not approaching as a slow accumulation. It was approaching as a closing distance. The kind of closing distance that the surveillance methodology registers not as a theoretical probability, but as a current operational tempo. Received, registered, filed. The carrying structure left Istanbul heavier than it arrived, not with a question mark like Amman, not with a compliance loyalty gap like Brussels, not with a calibration problem like Budapest. With the specific weight of a threat that had crossed the threshold from theoretical to operational, whose timeline was specific rather than uncertain, whose direction was toward 2003, and whose character indicated that the network, the pattern that had been documented in the third file since Budapest in 1993, was no longer something that only the formation could see. The bank held. The Bosphorus moved at 2.5 knots. The bridge remained above the two currents. And somewhere in the Istanbul operational geography, the 3 additional fishermen at the midpoint of the Galata Bridge's western railing, probability weight 0.38, filed below the action threshold, remained at their positions in the operational record as the posting concluded and the field moved forward toward what 2003 was already promising to require. The architecture holds. The significance is approaching. Stay in the shadows.